The winter wind cut through Riverside Shopping Center's parking lot like a knife, but Martha Henderson barely felt it anymore. At 67 years old, she'd learned to ignore a lot of things: the arthritis in her knees, the Social Security checks that never quite stretched far enough, the empty chair at her dinner table where George used to sit. But she couldn't ignore the sparkle in a child's eyes when they dropped a quarter into her donation jar. And that's what kept her standing here every Christmas Eve for the past 15 years. "Mrs. Claus, Mrs. Claus," a small voice cut through her thoughts. Martha looked down to see Sophia Martinez, a 7-year-old with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile, clutching her mother's hand. The little girl had been coming to this spot since she was 3, and Martha remembered every single visit. "Hello, sweetheart," Martha said, her voice warm despite the cold that had settled deep into her bones. She adjusted her Mrs. Claus costume, the same red velvet dress she'd worn since 1995, now faded and patched in places invisible to anyone who wasn't looking closely. The white fur trim had yellowed slightly, and the hem had been let down twice to accommodate her changing figure, but it still fit like an old friend's embrace. Sophia reached into her princess backpack and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, holding it out with both hands like it was made of gold. "Mama says this is for people who don't have homes, so they can eat Christmas dinner." Martha's throat tightened. She knew the Martinez family. Elena Martinez worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and serving lunch at the elementary school during the day. $5 meant something to them. It meant choosing between an extra gallon of milk or this act of generosity. "Thank you, precious girl," Martha whispered, accepting the money with hands that trembled from more than just the cold. She carefully placed it in the red donation jar that sat on a folding table beside her. The jar was already a quarter full, mostly 1s and 5s, a few 20s from earlier in the evening. $347 so far. Every penny would go to St. Michael's homeless shelter, where Father Rodriguez would transform it into Christmas dinner for 200 people who had nowhere else to go. Elena Martinez smiled sadly at Martha, her eyes reflecting a shared understanding of struggle. "Feliz Navidad, Mrs. Henderson." "Merry Christmas to you too, dear." As the Martinez family walked away, Martha gazed at the scene around her. The shopping center had transformed into something magical. White lights spiraled up the lamp posts, and a massive Christmas tree dominated the courtyard, its ornaments catching the glow from surrounding stores. Salvation Army bells rang somewhere in the distance, mixing with Mariah Carey's "All I Want for Christmas" bleeding through the mall speakers. The air smelled of roasting chestnuts from a vendor cart, and the sharp pine scent of fresh wreath stacked outside the grocery store. Families bustled past with shopping bags, their faces flushed with the pleasure of giving. Martha watched a father hoist his daughter onto his shoulders so she could see the decorations better. She watched a teenage couple share a candy cane, laughing at some private joke. She watched an elderly man in a wheelchair pause to warm his hands on a cup of hot chocolate, his veteran's cap catching the light. This was why she came, not for the cold or the long hours or the way her feet screamed by hour 6. She came because 15 years ago George had been the one to suggest it. "Martha," he'd said, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he scanned the newspaper, "St. Michael's needs volunteers for their Christmas fundraiser. What do you say? We're retired now. We've got time to give back." Time, that's what George always called it. Not money. They'd never had much of that on 2 teachers' pensions, but time. Time was the currency of those who'd spent 40 years shaping young minds, who understood that presence mattered more than presence. The first year they'd done it together. George dressed as Santa, his natural belly making the costume unnecessary, his genuine laugh booming across the parking lot. Martha had played Mrs. Claus and they'd collected $800 in a single evening. George had been so proud. "We're going to do this every year," he declared. Every single year. They'd kept that promise for 13 years. Then last December, 2 weeks before Christmas, George had clutched his chest while wrapping presents in their living room. The paramedics said it was massive and instant. He probably didn't suffer. That was supposed to be comforting. Martha had almost skipped last year's fundraiser. The thought of standing in this parking lot without George felt impossible. But on Christmas Eve morning, she'd pulled out the costume, and somehow her body had carried her here. She'd raised $600 alone, crying behind her white Mrs. Claus wig where no one could see. This year felt different. The grief had dulled from a scream to a whisper. She could think about George without her chest caving in. She could smile at the children without it feeling like a betrayal. She could stand here in the cold and remember that she was still alive, still useful, still capable of spreading joy. A young couple approached, the woman pregnant and glowing. They dropped a $20 bill into the jar. "Thank you for doing this," the man said. "My family needed St. Michael's help when I was a kid. I never forgot it." Martha felt her purpose settle around her shoulders like a warm shawl. This was meaning. This was legacy. This was love made visible. She checked her watch. 7:47 p.m. Another hour and 13 minutes, then she could pack up, deliver the donations to Father Rodriguez, and go home to her quiet apartment. Maybe she'd heat up some soup. Maybe she'd watch It's a Wonderful Life like she and George used to. Maybe she'd fall asleep in his armchair, wrapped in his favorite blanket. The parking lot's lights seemed to glow brighter as darkness settled fully over San Diego. Martha pulled her red coat tighter and smiled at the next family approaching. She didn't know that in 13 minutes, everything would change. She didn't know that 3 expensive cars were about to pull into the lot. She didn't know that her life was about to intersect with violence and courage and redemption. For now, there was only this moment, a cold evening, a warm heart, and the simple mathematics of giving. $367 now, every penny a small miracle. The Christmas spirit was alive and well in Martha Henderson's corner of the world. At least for 13 more minutes. The sound reached Martha before the sight did, a deep, aggressive rumble of engines that didn't belong to the family minivans and sensible sedans filling the parking lot. She looked up from counting change and felt her stomach tighten instinctively. 3 vehicles were approaching fast, too fast for a crowded shopping center on Christmas Eve. The Porsche 911 came first, midnight black with custom rims that probably cost more than Martha's annual income. It screeched into a handicapped space despite the lack of any permit, its engine revving twice after parking, a territorial announcement. The Mercedes G-Wagon followed, Arctic white and massive, its chrome accessories catching the Christmas lights like sharp teeth. Finally, the Range Rover Sport, cherry red and lifted, with speakers that made the bass from its stereo physically vibrate the air. The doors opened, and 3 young men emerged like they owned not just the vehicles but the entire world around them. Blake Morrison stepped out of the Porsche first. At 22, he was tall and athletic, with the kind of symmetrical face that had made him prom king and Instagram famous. His dirty blonde hair was styled in that deliberately messy way that required $40 worth of product. He wore a Canada Goose jacket worth $1,400, Balenciaga sneakers that cost $850, and a Rolex Submariner on his wrist that his father had given him for his 21st birthday, a casual $15,000 gift. But it was his eyes that told the real story, cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of consequence. Blake Morrison had never been told no in his entire life, not meaningfully, not permanently. His father Richard owned half the commercial real estate in San Diego. Money fixed everything in Blake's world. Chad Whitmore emerged from the Mercedes, shorter but stockier, a former high school linebacker who'd ridden his father's donations into Yale despite a 2.8 GPA. He wore a Gucci belt with a buckle so large it was almost comical, and his phone case was made of genuine python skin, because, as he drunkenly explained to someone at a party once, regular leather is for poor people. Chad's father was a prominent surgeon, and Chad had grown up hearing about how his father saved lives, how important they were, how rules that applied to ordinary people didn't really apply to them. Chad carried that entitlement like armor. His cheeks were flushed red. He'd been drinking since their lunch at the country club, and his eyes had that glassy, volatile quality of someone whose inhibitions had drowned 3 hours ago. Trevor Banks unfolded from the Range Rover, lean and tall, with dark hair gelled back and a smirk that never quite left his face. At 23, he was the oldest and arguably the worst. His father was a tech executive who'd made $400 million on a company sale, and Trevor had spent his life coasting on that success, dropping out of USC's business school because entrepreneurs don't need degrees. He wore an off-white hoodie that cost $600 and carried himself with the casual cruelty of someone who'd learned early that money could buy silence, compliance, and absolution. He'd had 3 DUIs sealed from his record. He'd paid off 2 girls who'd accused him of various transgressions at fraternity parties. In Trevor's world, everything and everyone had a price. They stood together near their vehicles for a moment, passing a silver flask between them. Expensive scotch, probably older than the people serving their families at Christmas parties. They were laughing about something, that particular brand of laughter that comes from shared cruelty, inside jokes built on the backs of people they considered beneath them. "Dude, this place is so depressing," Blake announced loudly, gesturing at the shopping center like he was narrating a documentary. "Look at all these peasants with their Walmart bags." Chad laughed, nearly stumbling. He was the drunkest of the 3. "We should have stayed at the yacht club. My dad said we could use his boat tonight." "Boring," Trevor said, his eyes scanning the parking lot like a predator. That's when he spotted Martha. "Oh shit, boys, check it out. Santa's elderly wife." All 3 turned to look at Martha, who was helping an elderly man drop some coins into her donation jar. She felt their attention like a cold spotlight and instinctively knew, the way prey knows when it's been marked, that trouble had arrived. They approached in a loose formation, still passing the flask, their designer sneakers crunching on the asphalt. A few families near Martha's setup noticed them coming and began gathering their children, that ancient instinct to move away from threat. The cheerful atmosphere that had surrounded Martha's little station began to evaporate like morning mist. "Evening, Grandma," Blake said, stopping about 3 feet from Martha's table. His voice was loud, performative, meant to be overheard. He pulled out his phone and started recording. "Doing a little poverty cosplay for Christmas. That's so precious." Martha forced a polite smile, the same one she'd perfected over 40 years of teaching when faced with difficult students or hostile parents. "Merry Christmas, young man. Would you like to make a donation to St. Michael's homeless shelter? Every bit helps." "Oh, she speaks," Trevor crowed, moving to Blake's side. He also had his phone out now, recording from a different angle. "Look at this setup. What is this, like $100? He leaned down to peer into the donation jar. "Damn, Grandma's hauling in the big bucks tonight." Chad circled around to Martha's other side, boxing her in. She could smell the alcohol on him, sharp and sour. "How much you making doing this? You keeping some for yourself? That's what I do." "It all goes to the shelter," Martha said, her voice steady despite the fear beginning to coil in her stomach. "These donations will provide Christmas dinner for 200 people tomorrow." 200 homeless people, Blake corrected, his lip curling. "You mean 200 junkies and lazy losers who couldn't get their shit together." A small crowd was forming, but no one intervened. People held up their phones, recording, but from a safe distance. This was America in 2024. Everyone documented everything, but no one wanted to be a hero. Someone might go viral. Someone might get hurt. Better to watch, to record, to share later with shocked emojis and thoughts and prayers. Martha's hands gripped the edge of her folding table. "I think you should move along now. You're scaring the children." Blake's face changed. The mock friendliness evaporated, replaced by something darker. His jaw clenched and his eyes narrowed. In his alcohol-soaked brain, this old woman had just disrespected him, told him what to do, treated him like he was the problem. "What did you just say to me?" he asked, his voice dropping low and dangerous. The temperature seemed to drop. The Christmas music playing from the stores suddenly felt obscene, cheerful notes clashing with the tension crackling through the air. Martha opened her mouth to respond, to de-escalate, to somehow navigate away from the violence she could feel approaching. But it was too late. Blake's hand shot out and grabbed her donation jar. "Let me show you what I think of your little charity," he snarled. And then everything went wrong. Blake Morrison's hand closed around the donation jar, and for one suspended moment, Martha thought he might actually drop some money into it. Hope was a stubborn thing, even in the face of obvious malice. But then his arm swung wide, and he hurled the jar sideways with all the force of a baseball pitcher on a mound. Glass container, an old pickle jar Martha had decorated with red and green ribbons, exploded against the pavement 15 feet away. The sound of shattering glass cut through the Christmas music like a gunshot. $367 in carefully collected donations scattered across the parking lot in a chaotic burst of bills and coins. Quarters rolled in every direction like desperate refugees fleeing disaster. Dollar bills caught the December wind and tumbled away like autumn leaves. A $50 bill, donated an hour ago by a grandmother who'd said it was from her late husband's memory, landed in a puddle of dirty slush. "Oops," Blake said, his voice dripping with mock concern. "Butterfingers." Martha's world narrowed to that scattered money. Each bill, each coin represented someone's sacrifice. The Martinez family's $5, the young couple expecting a baby, the veteran who'd given $20 on a fixed income, all of it thrown away like garbage, like it meant nothing. "No," she whispered, and then her body moved before her mind could catch up. Martha Henderson dropped to her knees on the cold, wet pavement. The impact sent pain shooting through her arthritic joints, but she barely noticed. Her hands scrambled across the asphalt, gathering coins, chasing bills that skittered away from her reaching fingers. Her Mrs. Claus hat fell off and her white wig shifted askew, but she didn't care. The money. She had to save the money. "Look at her," Chad laughed, his phone capturing every second. "She's like a raccoon digging through trash." Trevor was recording too, narrating for his Instagram story. "Yo, guys, we just found the saddest thing in San Diego. This old lady is literally crawling on the ground for pennies. This is what happens when you don't invest in crypto." Martha's fingers closed around a handful of quarters. Her glasses had slipped down her nose and tears blurred her vision, but she kept gathering. A $20 bill, 3 ones, a 5. Her hands were trembling so badly she could barely grip the coins. "Please," she said, not looking up at them, addressing the pavement, addressing God, addressing anyone who might listen. "Please, this is for people who need it, for families with children. Please." Blake squatted down beside her, his expensive cologne mixing with the smell of whiskey. He held his phone close to her face, zooming in. "Say hi to the internet, Grandma. You're about to be famous." That's when Martha tried to stand up, tried to gather her dignity along with the scattered donations. She got one foot under her, pushing up from the ground, her hand steadying herself on the bumper of a nearby car. She was going to ignore them. She would collect what she could, take it to Father Rodriguez, and try to replace what was lost from her own meager savings if she had to. But Trevor wasn't done. "Where do you think you're going?" he said, stepping directly into her path. At 61, he towered over Martha's 54 frame. "We're not finished with our Christmas entertainment." Martha clutched the money she'd gathered to her chest, maybe $60 worth, soaked and dirty. "I need to get my collection basket," she said, her voice shaking. "Please just let me." Trevor's designer sneaker connected with the red wicker basket that had been sitting beside Martha's table. It flew through the air in a perfect arc, tumbling end over end before crashing into a shopping cart 20 feet away. the few remaining donation envelopes inside scattered like wounded birds. "Oops," Trevor echoed Blake's earlier sentiment. "Guess you'll need a new basket." Something inside Martha broke. Not her spirit, that had survived the death of her husband, the struggle of living on a fixed income, the loneliness of long winters alone. But something else fractured. Her faith that decency lived in all people, that even the cruel had limits, that humanity meant something. "Why?" she asked, and her voice came out stronger than she felt. "Why would you do this? What did I do to you?" Blake stood up, brushing off his expensive jeans as if touching the same air as Martha had contaminated him. "You exist," he said simply. "You and all the other useless old people who think their little charities matter. You're just clutter, background noise in our world." Martha felt something she hadn't felt in 15 years of doing this charity work, genuine fear. Not concern, not unease, but primal animal fear. These young men weren't just cruel, they were empty. There was nothing behind their eyes, no empathy switch waiting to be flipped, no core of decency to appeal to. She tried to move past them, clutching her salvaged money, her body bent with more than age now. But Chad, wobbling drunk and mean, stepped into her path. His shoulder accidentally collided with hers, except there was nothing accidental about the force behind it. Martha stumbled backward. Her foot caught on a loose piece of the shattered jar. Time seemed to slow down the way it does in moments of disaster. She felt herself falling, her arms pinwheeling for balance, the money she'd gathered flying from her hands in a second explosion of currency. Her body twisted, and she landed hard on her side, her hip taking the impact first, then her shoulder, and finally her hands as they scraped across the rough pavement trying to break her fall. Pain erupted everywhere at once. Her hip screamed. Her shoulder throbbed. But worst was her right hand. She'd landed on a shard of the broken jar, and blood immediately began welling up from a deep cut across her palm. It ran down her wrist, soaking into the white fur trim of her Mrs. Claus sleeve, turning it pink then red. Martha lay there on the cold pavement, her costume twisted around her, her wig half off, blood dripping from her hand. And for the first time in her 67 years she felt truly helpless. The world was still moving around her. She could hear the Christmas music, the murmur of the watching crowd, the laughter of the three young men. But it all seemed distant, filtered through water. "Oh shit, she's bleeding," Chad said, but he was laughing. "Dude, we should bounce before someone calls the cops." "Relax," Trevor said, still recording. "Her fault for getting in the way, self-defense." Blake was posting the video already, his thumbs flying across his phone screen. "This is going to get so many views. Entitled Boomer gets reality check. Perfect." Martha tried to push herself up, but her cut hand couldn't support her weight. She collapsed back down, and the humiliation hurt worse than the physical pain. Around her, the scattered money, what she'd collected and what she'd gathered, lay like abandoned dreams. A $5 bill stuck to her cheek, held there by her tears. The crowd of onlookers had grown to maybe 30 people. Everyone was recording. No one was helping. This was how it ended, Martha thought. Not with dignity, not surrounded by love and purpose, but alone on the cold ground while strangers filmed her suffering for social media content. George had been wrong. Giving back wasn't always beautiful. Sometimes the world just took and took until there was nothing left to give. She closed her eyes, feeling the cold seep through her costume and into her bones. And then she heard the voice. "That's enough." The words were quiet, calm, and absolutely lethal. Martha opened her eyes. Everything was about to change. Marcus Reed had survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 firefights in Iraq, and a training accident that should have killed him. He'd learned to trust his instincts the way most people trust gravity, absolutely, without question. So when Atlas went rigid beside him in the hardware store parking lot, every nerve in Marcus's body snapped to attention. The German shepherd's ears shot forward, his entire 85-pound frame locked into that particular stillness that meant one thing: threat detected. Marcus had been reaching for his truck keys, his mind half occupied with the drill bits and wood screws in the bag he carried, materials for building shelves in his new apartment. He was 3 weeks into terminal leave from the Navy, transitioning to civilian life in San Diego after 12 years of service. The adjustment was harder than he'd expected. Too quiet, too safe, too normal. He woke up most nights still reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. But right now, in this moment, the old instincts flooded back like muscle memory. "What is it, boy?" Marcus asked quietly, his hand dropping to Atlas's shoulder. The dog's dark eyes were fixed on something across the parking lot, near the main shopping center entrance. His lip curled slightly, revealing teeth that had torn through a Taliban insurgent's arm 2 years ago in Kandahar province. Atlas wasn't just a pet. He was a war veteran too, a military working dog who'd done 4 deployments before an IED blast had damaged his hearing enough to retire him. The Navy had asked Marcus which dog he wanted to adopt when he separated from service. There had never been any question. Atlas had saved his life twice. The least Marcus could do was give him a peaceful retirement. Except Atlas wasn't acting peaceful right now. Marcus's eyes followed the dog's gaze. At first he saw only the normal Christmas Eve chaos, families with shopping bags, cars circling for parking spots, holiday music drifting through the cold air. Then he saw the crowd. About 30 people, maybe more, all clustered in a semicircle, all with their phones out. Not shopping, not moving, just watching. Something was happening in the center of that circle. Marcus's training kicked in automatically. He ran through the tactical assessment in seconds. Crowd behavior suggested a spectacle, not immediate danger to the observers. No one running away, no screaming. But the way people stood, some uncomfortable, shifting their weight, wanting to leave but not leaving, that suggested something wrong. Something everyone knew was wrong, but no one was stopping. "Come on," Marcus said, and Atlas moved with him immediately, perfectly healed the way they'd done 1,000 times on patrol. They covered the distance quickly, Marcus's 62 frame and Atlas's alert presence naturally creating a path through the crowd. People glanced at them and stepped aside. Something about a fit man in his early 30s with a military bearing and a German shepherd made people respectful, even unconsciously. As they pushed through the inner ring of observers, Marcus saw it all at once. An elderly woman on the ground, her Mrs. Claus costume dirty and torn, blood on her hand, her face a mask of pain and humiliation. Money scattered everywhere, bills and coins covering at least 20 feet of pavement, a shattered jar, an overturned basket. And 3 young men, expensive clothes, drunk swagger, phones out, laughing. One of them, tall, dark-haired, wearing a hoodie that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent, was literally recording the woman on the ground, narrating like it was comedy. Marcus's heart rate slowed. Everything around him became crystal clear, edges sharp, sounds distinct. It was the feeling he got right before contact with the enemy, that perfect, cold clarity where emotion disappeared and only purpose remained. He'd spent 12 years protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. That mission hadn't ended just because he'd taken off the uniform. "Atlas, heel," he said quietly, and they stepped forward into the circle. The first one to notice them was the blond kid in the Canada Goose jacket. He looked up from his phone, his eyes scanning Marcus dismissively, just another random civilian not worth attention. But then his gaze dropped to Atlas and something flickered across his face. Not quite fear yet, just recalculation. Marcus walked past him without acknowledgement, moving directly to the woman on the ground. He crouched beside her, his movements careful, non-threatening. Atlas positioned himself between Marcus and the 3 young men, his body a living barrier. "Ma'am," Marcus said softly, his voice the same one he'd used with frightened civilians in Helmand Province. "Are you hurt? Can you move?" Martha looked up at him, her eyes swimming with tears and shock. She saw a stranger's face, strong jaw, dark eyes, a faint scar across his left eyebrow. but something in his expression, in the controlled gentleness of his presence, made her feel safe for the first time in 10 minutes. "My hand," she whispered. "I cut it." Marcus could see the wound deep, bleeding steadily, probably needed stitches. He pulled off his jacket without hesitation, revealing the army t-shirt underneath, and wrapped it carefully around her hand. "Apply pressure. You're going to be okay." Then he stood up, and when he turned to face the three young men, everything about him changed. If Martha had seen gentleness, what Blake, Chad, and Trevor saw was something else entirely. They saw a man who carried violence like a second skin, who knew exactly how to use it, and who was choosing, actively, consciously choosing, to hold it in check. For now. Marcus's voice when he spoke was quiet, calm, the most dangerous kind of calm. "Help her up, collect this money, apologize, and leave." Blake laughed, but it sounded forced. "Who the hell are you supposed to be, Captain America?" "Last chance," Marcus said, and those two words carried the weight of 1,000 combat decisions behind them. Do the right thing, walk away. Chad, drunker and stupider than his friends, took a stumbling step forward. "Or what, tough guy, you gonna?" He didn't finish the sentence because Atlas released a sound that came from somewhere primal and ancient. Not quite a bark, not quite a growl, something in between that made every person in the crowd take an involuntary step backward. It was the sound of a predator that had tasted blood before and would again if necessary. The German shepherd's eyes were locked on Chad, unblinking, and in that moment, Chad sobered up enough to remember that humans had conquered the world with tools and cooperation, but dogs had conquered it first with teeth and pack mentality. "Your dog," Trevor started. "Is a veteran," Marcus interrupted, his eyes never leaving Blake's face. He'd identified the leader, the one who mattered. 3 Tour, specialized in threat detection and neutralization. He's very good at his job, and right now he's detecting a threat to that woman behind me. The parking lot had gone silent. Even the Christmas music seemed to have faded. 30 phones were still recording, but now they were recording something different, not helpless suffering, but the moment before justice. Blake felt it slipping away, his control, his power, his invincibility. This stranger with his war dog wasn't backing down, wasn't impressed by their cars or their clothes or their father's money. Blake's alcohol-soaked brain couldn't process it. He'd never encountered a boundary he couldn't cross. "Do you know who my father is?" Blake said, and even as the words left his mouth, he knew how weak they sounded. Marcus smiled then, but it wasn't a friendly expression. It was the smile of someone who'd faced actual enemy combatants, who'd dealt with real evil, who knew exactly where punk kids with daddy's money ranked on the scale of things to fear. "I don't care if your father is God himself," Marcus said quietly. "You're going to help that woman, now." Blake's hand clenched into a fist. His pride, his rage, his entire identity as someone who never lost, never backed down, never submitted, it all crashed together into one terrible decision. He lunged forward, arm swinging, meaning to teach this stranger that you didn't talk to Blake Morrison like that. It was the biggest mistake of his privileged life. Marcus moved. Blake Morrison's punch came in wild and telegraphed, the kind of sloppy haymaker thrown by someone who'd never been in a real fight. His father's money had bought him a gym membership and a personal trainer, but they couldn't buy combat instinct or actual experience. Marcus saw the attack coming from a mile away, the shoulder drop, the weight shift, the wind-up that screamed amateur. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. Marcus's left hand came up and caught Blake's wrist mid-swing, his grip precise and unbreakable. In the same fluid motion, he pivoted his body, used Blake's own momentum against him, and guided the young man's arm into a basic but effective joint lock. Blake's body followed where his arm went. Physics and pain left him no choice. Marcus controlled the descent, lowering Blake to the pavement with the kind of care you'd use setting down something fragile, until the 22-year-old was kneeling, his arm extended at an angle that screamed if he moved wrong, something would tear. "Don't," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't fight it, you'll dislocate your shoulder." Blake's face pressed against the cold asphalt, his expensive jacket scraping against the ground. The world had flipped upside down in less time than it took to blink. One moment he'd been in control, the next he was on his knees, his arm burning with pain, completely and utterly helpless. "Let him go," Chad shouted, his voice cracking with panic. He pulled out his phone, fingers fumbling. "I'm calling the cops. That's assault. I'm recording this." "Good," Marcus said, not looking away from Blake. "Call them. Make sure you show them the part where he attacked first. I'm sure the other 30 people recording got that too." Trevor's hand went to his pocket and Atlas exploded into motion. The German Shepherd didn't attack, his training was too precise for that. But he lunged forward, putting himself directly between Trevor and Marcus, his teeth bared, a continuous low growl rumbling from his chest. Trevor froze, his hand still halfway to his pocket, his face gone pale. "He's going for a weapon," someone in the crowd shouted. "It's just my phone," Trevor's voice went up an octave. "Just my phone, I swear." "Hands where I can see them," Marcus said, his tone unchanged, still calm, still controlled, still absolutely in command. "Both of you, now." Chad and Trevor raised their hands slowly, and suddenly the absurdity of their situation crashed over them. 3 wealthy college students, used to running every social situation, every party, every interaction, now stood with their hands up like criminals while a stranger knelt on their friend, and a war dog stood ready to rip their throats out. The crowd had changed. Before, they'd been passive observers, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Now they surged forward slightly, emboldened. A large man in a Chargers jersey stepped into the circle, Jim Crawford, retired LAPD, who'd been watching the whole thing with mounting rage. "Son," Jim said to Trevor, his voice carrying 30 years of police authority, "I'm retired law enforcement and I watched you and your friends assault that elderly woman. I've already called 911. They're 2 minutes out. I suggest you stand very, very still." A woman, mid-40s in nursing scrubs, pushed through to Martha, kneeling beside her. "I'm a nurse. Let me see that hand, honey." Martha, still dazed, extended her wrapped hand. The nurse gently unwrapped Marcus's jacket and assessed the wound. "This needs stitches, but you're going to be okay. What's your name, sweetheart?" "Martha," she whispered. "Martha Henderson." "I'm Sarah. You just sit tight, Martha. Help is coming." Marcus could hear sirens now, still distant but approaching. He looked down at Blake, whose face was red with humiliation and residual alcohol, tears actually forming in the corners of his eyes. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, his voice quiet enough that only Blake could hear. "I'm going to let you up. You're going to sit on that curb over there with your friends. You're not going to run. You're not going to make calls to Daddy. You're going to wait for the police and face what you did. Because that woman behind me," his grip tightened slightly, making Blake gasp, "she's somebody's mother. Somebody's grandmother. She was helping people who have nothing and you treated her like garbage. So you're going to sit there and think about what kind of man you want to be." "You don't understand," Blake choked out. "My father." "Your father isn't here, and maybe that's the problem." Marcus released the pressure and helped Blake to his feet, maintaining control until the young man was standing. "Over there, sit." Blake stumbled to the curb, his bravado completely shattered. He sat heavily, his expensive jeans soaking up dirty slush water, his hands shaking. Trevor and Chad joined him without being told, the 3 of them huddling together like children waiting outside the principal's office. Atlas maintained his position, standing guard, his eyes moving between the 3 young men and the approaching sirens. His tail was still, his posture rigid, a soldier at his post. Marcus turned back to Martha. She was sitting up now, the nurse wrapping her hand with gauze from a first aid kit someone had produced. Around them, other people were collecting the scattered money, picking up bills and coins, putting them in shopping bags, boxes, whatever they could find. "The donations," Martha said weakly. "I need to count." "We've got it, ma'am," said a teenage boy in a grocery store uniform, carefully gathering quarters into a paper cup. "We're not going to let you lose a penny." "More than that," said a woman in a business suit, pulling out her wallet. "I'm adding 100. What those boys did," her voice cracked with emotion. "That's not who we are." 200 from me," called out a man in construction clothes. 50, said someone else. 100, said another voice. Marcus watched as the crowd transformed from passive observers to active participants. The same people who'd stood by and filmed were now digging into their wallets and purses, pulling out 20s, 50s, even hundreds. The tragedy had catalyzed something in them: guilt, maybe, or anger, or just the desperate need to prove that kindness could win. 2 San Diego police cruisers pulled into the parking lot, lights flashing, followed by an ambulance. 4 officers emerged, hands on their belts, assessing the scene. The lead officer, a woman in her 40s with sergeant stripes, walked directly to Jim Crawford. "Jim," she said, recognizing the retired officer, "what have we got?" "Hey, Ramirez, assault on an elderly woman caught on about 50 cameras." He pointed to Blake, Chad, and Trevor on the curb. "Those 3. The woman's over there, Mrs. Henderson, needs medical attention. That guy with the dog," he gestured to Marcus, "intervened when they attacked. Clean defense, he's the good guy." Sergeant Ramirez looked at Marcus, taking in the military bearing, the controlled stance, the alert dog. "Military." "Navy, SEAL Team 3, Marcus Reed." He showed his military ID. She nodded, respect crossing her face. "Thank you for stepping in. We'll need your statement." "Yes, ma'am." The paramedics reached Martha, beginning their assessment while the other officers approached Blake, Chad, and Trevor. The moment the police stood over them, the reality of their situation crashed down like a physical weight. "Officers, there's been a misunderstanding," Trevor started, his smooth talker voice emerging. "We were just—" "Save it," Ramirez said flatly. She'd been a cop for 23 years. She knew entitled rich kids when she saw them. "Blake Morrison, Chad Whitmore, Trevor Banks, stand up. You have the right to remain silent." As she began reading them their rights, Chad's face went white. "Wait, you're arresting us. Do you know who our fathers are?" Ramirez didn't even pause. "I know exactly who your fathers are, and right now I don't care. Turn around." The click of handcuffs echoed through the parking lot like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence. 3 pairs. 3 young men who'd never faced real consequences, suddenly understanding that the world was bigger than their bank accounts. Blake looked back at Marcus as the officer guided him toward the cruiser. For just a moment their eyes met. Blake opened his mouth as if to say something, a threat, maybe, or a curse, but what he saw in Marcus's eyes stopped him cold. Not anger, not triumph, just quiet disappointment, like looking at something that could have been better but chose not to be. The cruiser doors closed with definitive thuds. Justice, Marcus thought, didn't always roar. Sometimes it clicked shut quietly in the dark. The parking lot had transformed into a crime scene. Yellow police tape cordoned off Martha's collection area, and evidence markers numbered the locations where money had scattered. Officer Ramirez moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency, collecting witness information, but she quickly realized she wouldn't need to chase anyone down. They were lining up voluntarily. "I got the whole thing on video," said a college student, holding up her phone. "From the moment they threw the donation jar. Want me to airdrop it to you?" "Email it here," Ramirez said, handing her a card with the department's evidence submission address. "Include your contact information." "I recorded it too," said a middle-aged man in a business suit. "From a different angle, you can see their faces clearly." "Same here," chimed in a teenage girl. "I got when they kicked her basket and when he shoved her down." Within 10 minutes, Ramirez had gathered contact information from 23 witnesses, and received links to 17 different video recordings. The assault was documented from more angles than most Hollywood productions. Every movement, every word, every moment of cruelty captured in high definition on devices that cost more than Martha's monthly Social Security check. In the back of patrol car number 3447, Blake Morrison sat in handcuffs, his wrists chafing against the metal, his $1,400 jacket bunched uncomfortably around his shoulders. He could see through the window as more and more people talked to the police, as phones were held up showing videos, as his entire world collapsed in real time. "This is insane," he muttered to Chad, who sat beside him, pale and sweating. "They can't arrest us for this. It's her word against ours." "Blake," Chad whispered, his voice shaking, "there are like 50 videos, everyone saw, everyone recorded." In the patrol car behind them, Trevor sat alone, his lawyer-trained mind finally cutting through the alcohol fog to assess the situation. Assault and battery on an elderly person. California Penal Code 368, elder abuse. Enhanced penalties. Possible felony charges. Multiple witnesses. Video evidence. His father's money could buy good lawyers, but it couldn't erase footage that was probably already uploading to social media. He pulled out his phone. They hadn't confiscated it yet, and his stomach dropped. His own Instagram story, the one he'd posted 20 minutes ago showing Martha on the ground, now had 3,847 views and counting. The comments were rolling in. "Dude, this is disgusting. Delete this. You're assaulting an old lady and posting it. Someone call the police on these psychos. I know where this is. I'm heading there now. Blake Morrison, isn't that Richard Morrison's son?" Trevor's hands started shaking. He tried to delete the post, but it was too late. People had already screen-recorded it, downloaded it, shared it. Digital immortality was forever, and his forever now included attacking a 67-year-old woman dressed as Mrs. Claus on Christmas Eve. Meanwhile, paramedics had Martha on a gurney, an IV in her arm, her hand properly bandaged. Her blood pressure was elevated from the stress and shock, but she was stable. Sarah, the nurse who'd first helped her, held her other hand. "You're going to be fine, Martha," Sarah said gently. "They're taking you to Memorial for stitches and observation. I'll follow in my car, okay? You won't be alone." Tears streamed down Martha's face, but they weren't tears of pain anymore. Around her, strangers had collected every penny of the scattered donations and added their own. A shopping bag full of cash and checks sat in the ambulance beside her. Someone had counted it at $1,847 and still growing as more people added to it. "I don't understand," Martha whispered. "Why are all these people helping me?" "Because that's what good people do when they see something wrong," Sarah said. "We help." Marcus stood near his truck, giving his statement to Officer Chen, a younger cop with a notebook and a body camera recording everything. Atlas sat at his feet, finally relaxed, his tongue lolling out slightly. "So you witnessed the assault?" Chen asked. "I witnessed the aftermath initially. I saw the victim on the ground, saw the suspects standing over her, one of them filming, money scattered everywhere. When I approached and asked them to help her, the suspect in the Canada Goose jacket, Blake Morrison, became aggressive and threw a punch at me." "And you restrained him?" "I defended myself and controlled the threat. I used appropriate force to prevent further harm to myself or the victim. I maintained control until law enforcement arrived." Chen looked up from his notes. "Your former military?" "Active duty until 3 weeks ago, Navy SEAL." "It shows," Chen said with a slight smile. "That was a textbook restraint. No excessive force, no injuries to the suspect beyond some bruised pride. If all civilian interventions were that clean, my job would be easier." Jim Crawford approached, his retired cop swagger evident. "Officer, I got about 30 years with LAPD, and I'm telling you, this man right here saved that woman from worse. Those 3 punks were working themselves up. If he hadn't stepped in," Jim shook his head. I'm ashamed I didn't do it myself, just stood there like everyone else. You called 911, Marcus said. That's helping. Not enough, Jim said quietly, but thank you for doing what I should have done. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. He didn't like being called a hero. In his experience, heroes usually ended up dead or traumatized, and he'd seen too many of both. He'd just done what needed doing, the same as he'd done on 100 missions overseas. Someone needed help. He helped. That was the job, uniform or not. Across the parking lot, a news van from Channel 8 pulled in, its satellite dish extending into the night sky. Then another from Channel 10. Then Fox 5. Someone had tipped off the media, probably multiple someones, and now the story was about to go from local incident to regional news. Blake saw the news crews and felt his bladder weaken. No, 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 he chanted under his breath. His father watched the local news every night. His mother's bridge club friends watched the local news. Everyone he knew watched the local news. Sergeant Ramirez opened the cruiser door. Blake Morrison. Yes, his voice came out small, childlike. Your father's on the phone. He wants to talk to you. Blake's heart sank even further. I can't. You can take the call or not. Your choice. But I've already spoken to him and I've already told him what you did. So has Officer Chen. So have about 6 witnesses who called him directly. She held out her cell phone. Your call. Blake took the phone with trembling hands. Dad. Richard Morrison's voice came through like the wrath of God. Not yelling, that would have been easier. Instead, cold, flat, disappointed. What did you do? Dad, it wasn't. It was just a joke that got out of hand. I'm watching video of you throwing an elderly woman's charity donations across a parking lot. I'm watching video of you and your friends kicking her basket while she's on the ground bleeding. I'm watching you assault a Navy SEAL. Please explain to me what part of that is a joke, Blake. Take your time. I'll wait. Silence. Blake had no words, no excuse, no spin. I've already called Daniel Hutchins. He's a criminal defense attorney, the best in San Diego. He's expensive. He's good. And you're going to need him because I'm not making this go away, son. You're going to face what you did. But Dad, I spent 30 years building a reputation in this city. 30 years of honest business, charitable giving, community service. You just destroyed it in 10 minutes. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to cooperate with the police. You're going to plead guilty to whatever the DA charges you with. You're going to do your community service. And you're going to learn that being my son doesn't make you special. It makes you responsible for being better. The line went dead. Blake handed the phone back to Ramirez, his face wet with tears. In the other patrol car, Chad and Trevor were having similar conversations with their own fathers, all ending the same way. You're on your own. Martha's ambulance pulled away, lights flashing but no siren. She was stable, not critical. As it left, people in the parking lot began to applaud. It started with one person, then spread through the crowd like wildfire. Applause for Martha. Applause for Marcus. Applause for the idea that sometimes, just sometimes, good wins. Marcus climbed into his truck, Atlas jumping up beside him into the passenger seat. Through the windshield, he could see the news cameras setting up, reporters checking their hair in compact mirrors, preparing to broadcast this story to thousands of homes on Christmas Eve. He started the engine and drove away quietly, leaving before they could ask him for an interview. Justice didn't need a spotlight. It just needed to be done. By 10:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve, #Justice for Mrs. Claus was trending number 3 nationally on Twitter, sandwiched between a presidential tweet and a pop star's surprise album drop. The videos had spread like wildfire across every social media platform: TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Reddit, each one showing the same brutal scene from different angles. 3 wealthy young men tormenting an elderly woman in a Mrs. Claus costume. But it was Blake's own Instagram story that became the most damning evidence. The one he'd posted himself, narrating Martha's humiliation like it was entertainment. Within 4 hours, it had been viewed 2.3 million times, downloaded by thousands, and turned into a case study of entitled cruelty. News outlets didn't even need to search for footage. It had been handed to them gift-wrapped by the perpetrators themselves. At San Diego Memorial Hospital, Martha sat in an examination room, her hand now sporting 12 neat stitches and wrapped in professional bandaging. The ER doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Patel, had given her something for the pain, and the sharp edges of the evening had finally begun to soften. Sarah, the nurse from the parking lot, had kept her word. She sat beside Martha's bed, scrolling through her phone with increasing amazement. "Martha, you need to see this. The donations. They're going through the roof." Martha's eyes were heavy with exhaustion and medication, but she focused on the phone screen Sarah held up. St. Michael's Homeless Shelter had set up an emergency GoFundMe page 2 hours ago. Father Rodriguez had acted fast when the news broke. The goal had been $10,000 to replace the destroyed donations and fund Christmas dinner. Current total, $284,847. And it was climbing by thousands every minute. "That can't be real," Martha whispered. That's impossible." "It's real," Sarah said, tears in her own eyes. "People are donating from all over the country. $10, $20, $100. There's one donation here for $5,000 from someone in Seattle, another for $10,000 from a veterans organization in Texas. Martha, you're going to change so many lives." Martha's hands trembled as she took the phone, scrolling through the comments attached to donations. "My grandmother was attacked last year. This one's for her. Faith in humanity restored. Thank you, Mrs. Claus." From one teacher to another, "You deserved better." "My son is a Marine. He'd have done exactly what that SEAL did. Thank you both." At his small apartment in North Park, Marcus sat on his couch with Atlas's head in his lap, trying to ignore his phone. It had been ringing nonstop for 3 hours. News stations, talk shows, his old commander from the teams, his mother in Ohio, crying and proud and worried all at once, friends from his unit sending screenshots of news articles with subject lines like "Dude, you're famous," and "You broke the internet." He turned off his social media notifications after the first 100 tags, but he'd made the mistake of checking Twitter once. His face was everywhere. Someone had identified him, probably pulled his name from a witness report, and within an hour, industrious internet sleuths had found his service record, his commendations, photos from his deployments. "Navy SEAL hero protects Mrs. Claus," read one headline. "War veteran serves justice on Christmas Eve," said another. Marcus hated it. He wasn't a hero. Heroes were the guys who didn't come home, the ones who threw themselves on grenades, who died saving their brothers. He just stopped 3 drunk idiots from hurting an old lady. That wasn't heroism. That was basic human decency. His phone buzzed again. This time he answered. Marcus Reed, a professional voice, female, confident. "Speaking. This is Amanda Chen from Good Morning America. We'd love to have you on the show tomorrow to talk about what happened tonight. We can send a crew to San Diego, first-class travel, compensation for your time." "No, thank you. Mr. Reed, the American people want to hear." "The American people should hear about Martha Henderson. She's the one who's been helping homeless families for 15 years. She's the story, not me." He hung up before she could respond. Atlas whined softly, sensing his handler's discomfort. Marcus scratched behind the dog's ears. "We just did our job, boy, that's all." Across town, in 3 separate homes, 3 families were having the worst night of their lives. At the Morrison estate in La Jolla, Richard Morrison sat in his study, watching news coverage on 3 different screens while his phone erupted with calls and texts. Business partners distancing themselves. The country club president suggesting he take some time away. An email from his company's PR firm with the subject line, "Urgent, Crisis Management, NEEDED." His wife, Catherine, stood in the doorway, her face puffy from crying. "They're calling him a monster, Richard, our son. Our son attacked a 67-year-old woman on camera," Richard said, his voice hollow. "What did you expect them to call him? He's still our child. He's 22 years old. He's not a child, and maybe that's our fault." Richard turned to face her. "Maybe we gave him everything and taught him nothing. Maybe we showed him that money fixes problems instead of teaching him not to create them." Catherine had no answer. Similar scenes played out at the Whitmore and Banks residences. Dr. Jonathan Whitmore watched his son's mugshot appear on the evening news and realized his decades of saving lives meant nothing compared to 30 seconds of his son destroying one. Trevor Banks, SR, sat in his home office, reading comments on Reddit calling for his tech company to be boycotted, calling for him to resign from charity boards, calling for his family to be canceled. The internet had become judge, jury, and executioner, and the verdict was unanimous: guilty. At the San Diego County Jail, Blake, Chad, and Trevor sat in a holding cell, still in their expensive clothes, now rumpled and smelling of fear and stale alcohol. They'd been booked on multiple charges: assault and battery on an elderly person, California Penal Code 368, petty theft, and disturbing the peace. The bail had been set at $50,000 each. Their fathers had the money, but the lawyers had advised against posting it until morning. "Let them sit overnight," Daniel Hutchins had told Richard Morrison. "Let them understand consequences." Blake sat on the concrete bench, his head in his hands. In the cell next to them, a man arrested for public intoxication kept shouting their names, having recognized them from the news. "You're those punks who beat up Mrs. Claus. Real tough guys, huh? 3 against 1 old lady." Other inmates joined in. The catcalls, the threats. The justice system had its own way of delivering lessons before the courts even convened. Chad was crying openly, his tough guy persona completely shattered. Trevor stared at the wall, his mind running calculations, trying to find the angle, the loophole, the way out. But there wasn't one. For the first time in his life, money couldn't solve his problem. By Christmas morning, St. Michael's Homeless Shelter's GoFundMe had reached $891,000. Local news crews filmed Father Rodriguez opening donations, tears streaming down his weathered face. "This is a miracle," he said to the cameras. "This is what Christmas really means. Not what those boys did, but what happened after. The community rising up, strangers becoming family, love winning." At noon, Martha was released from the hospital. A small crowd had gathered outside, not reporters but regular people. They applauded as she emerged in a wheelchair, her hand bandaged, her eyes wide with disbelief. Someone handed her flowers. Someone else handed her a card signed by over 100 people. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you all so much." An elderly veteran in a wheelchair rolled forward. "Ma'am, my name is Robert Chen. I was homeless 3 years ago. St. Michael's gave me meals and helped me find housing. You saved my life. I just wanted to say thank you." Martha took his hand with her good one and squeezed. That evening, Marcus finally agreed to one interview, a local San Diego news station, and only because they promised to focus on Martha's years of service. He sat on his couch with Atlas, uncomfortable in a button-down shirt, answering questions with military brevity. "Why did you step in?" the reporter asked. "Because it was the right thing to do." "Are you glad you did it?" "I'm glad Mrs. Henderson is okay. I'm glad the community came together. That's what matters." "What would you say to Blake Morrison and his friends?" Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'd say they have a choice now. They can let this define them or they can let it change them. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after." The interview went viral for different reasons than the assault videos. Because in a world hungry for anger and revenge, Marcus offered something else: redemption. The ripple effect had begun. And it was far from over 1 year later, Christmas Eve 2025. The Riverside Shopping Center parking lot looked completely different from the year before. Where Martha had once stood alone with a folding table and a donation jar, there now stood a full pavilion decorated with thousands of lights, heating lamps, and professional signage reading, "Martha's Christmas Hope, supporting St. Michael's homeless shelter." Martha Henderson, now 68, stood at the center of it all in her Mrs. Claus costume, the same one from last year but professionally cleaned and repaired. Her hand had healed completely, though she still felt a phantom ache when the weather turned cold. But tonight, she wasn't cold. Tonight, she was surrounded by warmth. "Mrs. Henderson, where do you want the hot chocolate station?" called out a young volunteer in a red apron. "Near the entrance, dear, so people smell it first thing." The volunteer nodded and moved off. Martha watched her go, marveling at how much had changed. St. Michael's homeless shelter had grown exponentially with the $1.2 million in final donations from last Christmas. They'd expanded from serving 200 people to serving 600. They'd added a job training program, a medical clinic, and transitional housing. Lives were being rebuilt every single day. And it had all started with one terrible night and one act of courage. "Martha," a familiar deep voice called out. She turned to see Marcus Reed approaching, a genuine Santa suit replacing his usual jeans and flannel shirt. Atlas trotted beside him, sporting a red vest with "Therapy Dog" embroidered on the side. The German Shepherd had become a certified therapy animal 6 months ago, visiting hospitals and schools, his war-hardened instincts now channeled into bringing comfort instead of confronting threats. "Marcus," Martha's face lit up like the Christmas lights around them, "and Atlas, don't you both look handsome?" Marcus gave her a gentle hug, careful of her smaller frame. Over the past year, they'd become close friends. Marcus had struggled with civilian transition, the nightmares, the hypervigilance, the feeling of purposelessness that haunted so many veterans. But volunteering at the shelter had given him something his therapist at the VA called continued mission focus. He wasn't a warrior anymore, but he was still a protector, just in a different way. "Where do you need me?" he asked. "The kids' area. We've got about 40 children coming from 3 different shelters. They're going to need Santa." Marcus smiled, something he did more easily now, on it. As he walked toward the children's section, Martha noticed 3 figures approaching from the parking lot. Her breath caught. She'd known they were coming, Father Rodriguez had told her, but seeing them was different. Blake Morrison, Chad Whitmore, and Trevor Banks walked toward her in matching volunteer t-shirts, their expensive clothes replaced by simple jeans and worn jackets. They looked different. Blake had lost the arrogant swagger. His shoulders were less cocky, his eyes less entitled. Chad had lost weight, the bloat of privilege and alcohol replaced by the lean look of someone who'd been working with their hands. Trevor's designer haircut had grown out, unstyled, and his expression held something it never had before: humility. The legal consequences had been severe but fair. All 3 had pleaded guilty to felony elder abuse as part of a plea deal. They'd received suspended sentences, no jail time, but 3 years of probation, 500 hours of community service each, mandatory anger management counseling, and substance abuse treatment. They'd been expelled from their universities. Blake and Chad had lost their trust funds, their fathers making good on promises that money wouldn't solve this. Trevor's father had stepped down from 2 charity boards, the family name permanently tarnished. But the real punishment had been the court's requirement. All 500 hours of community service must be completed at St. Michael's homeless shelter, under Father Rodriguez's supervision. Blake approached first, stopping a respectful distance from Martha. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet and sincere. "Mrs. Henderson, thank you for letting us volunteer tonight." Martha studied his face. She'd seen him twice a week for the past 9 months as he completed his service hours. She'd watched him serve meals with trembling hands that first week, his face burning with shame every time someone recognized him. She'd watched him break down crying in the shelter kitchen after a homeless veteran thanked him for his help. "That man fought for my freedom," Blake had sobbed to Father Rodriguez, "and I treated him like garbage." She'd watched all three of them transform, slowly, painfully, like broken bones healing. "Blake," Martha said gently, and then opened her arms. He collapsed into the hug, this 23-year-old man-child who'd kicked her basket and mocked her suffering. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into her shoulder. "I'm so sorry." "I know, dear. I forgave you a long time ago." She pulled back and looked at all three of them. "Now you need to forgive yourselves and do better." Chad wiped his eyes. "We brought something." He held out an envelope. "It's not much. We're all working minimum wage jobs now, saving up for community college, but we wanted to contribute." Martha opened it. Inside were 3 checks, each for $500. $1,500 from 3 young men who used to spend that on a single bottle of champagne. "This means more than any amount your father's money could have given," Martha said, her voice thick with emotion. "Because you earned this. You sacrificed for this. This came from your hearts." Trevor spoke for the first time, his voice hoarse. "Mrs. Henderson, I don't expect you to forget what we did, but I hope someday you can believe that we're different people now. The shelter, working with people who have lost everything, it changed us. You changed us." Martha took his hand. "You changed yourselves, Trevor. You did the work. I'm just grateful you chose to." The evening unfolded like a dream. Families arrived, some homeless, some not, all welcomed equally. Children lined up to see Santa Marcus, who had Atlas demonstrate tricks that made them squeal with laughter. Blake, Chad, and Trevor worked the food line, serving plates of turkey, mashed potatoes, and green beans with careful attention, thanking each person they served. At one point, Martha watched Blake kneel down to help a homeless man in a wheelchair cut his food. The man was a Vietnam veteran missing his right arm. Blake cut the turkey into small pieces, adjusted the plate so everything was reachable, and then just sat with him, listening to stories about Saigon and the Mekong Delta. The Blake Morrison from a year ago would have walked past that man without seeing him. The Blake Morrison now saw him as a person, as a hero, as someone worthy of dignity and time. Sophia Martinez appeared, now 8 years old, her gap-toothed smile even wider. "Mrs. Claus, I brought my whole class." She gestured to a group of children who'd come with homemade cards and small donations, pennies and nickels saved from allowances. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. My teacher said you're a hero. She said you showed everyone that one person can make a difference." Martha shook her head gently. "No, dear, I'm not the hero. Marcus is, Atlas is, your teacher is. Everyone who helps is a hero. All we have to do is choose to care." As the evening drew to a close, Martha stood at the center of the pavilion, surrounded by the life that had grown from pain. St. Michael's had served 600 Christmas dinners tonight. The donations had reached $15,000, enough to keep the shelter running well into the new year. Volunteers from the community, over 50 of them, had given their Christmas Eve to serve others. Marcus appeared at her side, Atlas yawning widely. "Successful night, Mrs. Claus." "The best one yet, Santa." Blake, Chad, and Trevor approached together. Their community service hours were technically complete. They'd finished their 500 hours 2 months ago, but they kept coming back. "Mrs. Henderson," Blake said, "we were wondering, can we come back next week to help with the New Year's meal service?" Martha smiled, feeling George's presence somehow, like he was watching and approving. "I'd like that very much." As the parking lot emptied and the lights began to dim, Martha stood with Marcus, Atlas, and 3 young men who'd once been her attackers but were now her students. The cold December wind blew across them, but it felt like a blessing. "You know what I've learned this year?" Martha said to no one in particular. "What's that?" Marcus asked. "That redemption is real, that people can change, that the worst moment of your life can become the catalyst for your best self." She looked at Blake, Chad, and Trevor. You three could have let that night destroy you. Instead, you let it remake you. Trevor's voice was soft. You gave us a second chance when you didn't have to. Because that's what love does, Martha said simply. Love gives chances, love forgives, love transforms. The five of them stood together in the glow of Christmas lights, an unlikely family forged in fire and redeemed by grace. A teacher and a warrior, a soldier dog and three reformed boys, proof that even the darkest night could birth the brightest dawn. Above them, stars pierced the December sky. And somewhere in the distance, bells were ringing. The end.